Today, on Good Friday, we're reading from the book of John, chapter 19, starting at verse 16. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him two others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. The chief priests of the Jews protested to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be King of the Jews." Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. This garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. "Let's not tear it," they said to one another. "Let's decide by lot who will get it." This happened that the scripture might be fulfilled that said, "They divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment." So this is what the soldiers did. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Later, knowing that everything had now been finished, so that the scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of the hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he had received the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Now, it was the day of preparation, and the next day was to be a special Sabbath. Because the Jewish leaders did not want the bodies left on the crosses during the Sabbath, they asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down. The soldiers therefore came and broke the legs of the first man who had been crucified with Jesus, and then those of the other. But when they came to Jesus, they found that he was already dead. They did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. The man who saw this has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you also may believe. These things happened so that the scripture would be fulfilled. Not one of his bones will be broken. And, as another scripture says, they will look on the one they have pierced. Later, Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for the body of Jesus. Now Joseph was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly because he feared the Jewish leaders. With Pilate's permission, he came and took the body away. He was accompanied by Nicodemus, the man who earlier had visited Jesus at night. Nicodemus bought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds. Taking Jesus' body, the two of them wrapped it with the spices in strips of linen. This was in accordance with Jewish burial customs. At the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. Because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. It's such a mystery, isn't it? It throws up so many questions. Why did Jesus have to do this? Wasn't there another way? It does seem far beyond our understanding. But Jesus came so that we may have life in all its fullness. You can read that in John chapter 10, verse 10. That'll mean different things to different people, but for me, it means that through his death and resurrection, I can be free from sin and guilt and shame, things that are often like a ball and chain and hold us back, because he's paid for all that. We are forgiven people. And in Luke's Gospel, while Jesus is hanging on the cross and people are jeering him, even there he prays that God will forgive them. Extraordinary. It also opened up a new way which we so often take for granted. In a couple of the other accounts when Jesus died, a load of things happened, like the sky going black and there being an earthquake. But they also mention that the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom. A huge curtain torn just like that. What's that about? Well, before this happened, there was a hierarchy whereby only the high priests were allowed into the most sacred part of the temple, the Holy of Holies, the place where God was. It was behind a curtain and no one else could go in there. But that's not how we live, right? We all have direct access to the Father through Jesus. I know that sometimes I take that for granted, but it's worth spending some time thinking about this over the next few days as we remember this grim day, that curtain was torn so that we can have direct access to the Father rather than going through the high priest. But unlike those first disciples who hadn't got a clue what was going on, we know and can look forward to Sunday when we remember and celebrate his rising from and defeating of